My dad's childhood home is about just under 2 hours away by car from our house. It's a farm, and I've always loved the atmosphere there. When I started riding a motorcycle in high school, I often went there alone during summer and winter vacations. My grandparents were always happy to see me and would say, "We're glad you come often." However, the last time I visited was just before I entered my 3rd year of high school. So it's been over 10 years since I last went there. It's not that I didn't want to go, but rather, I couldn't. Here's why. At the beginning of spring vacation, I decided to go to my grandpa's house on my motorcycle because the weather was good. It was still chilly, but the wide veranda was warm and comfortable, so I relaxed there for a while. Then, I started hearing a strange sound. Po-po, po-po-po, po-po. It wasn't a mechanical sound, but it felt like it was being made by a person. It was a sound that could be either a voiced or a semi-voiced sound. Wondering what it was, I spotted a hat on the hedge in the garden. The hat wasn't placed on top of the hedge, but it was moving sideways on its own. When it reached a gap in the hedge, I saw a woman. Well, the hat was being worn by the woman. She was wearing a pale dress, but the hedge is about 2 meters high. Just how tall must this woman be to be able to stick her head out from above that hedge? While I was still surprised, the woman moved again and disappeared from my view. The hat was gone too. Also, before I knew it, the po-po-po sound had stopped. At that time, I didn't think much more than wondering if the tall woman, who was originally tall, was wearing platform boots, or if the tall man, wearing high-heeled shoes, had cross-dressed. Afterward, while drinking tea in the living room, I told Grandpa and Grandma about what I saw earlier. I said, "I saw a big woman earlier. I wonder if it was a man cross-dressing." They only replied with a casual, "Oh, really?" But as soon as I said, "She was taller than the fence. She was wearing a hat and making strange noises like po-po," their movements suddenly stopped. I mean, they literally froze. After that, Grandpa bombarded me with questions in an angry tone, asking when I saw her, where I saw her, and how much taller she was than the fence. Despite being overwhelmed by Grandpa's intensity, I answered his questions, and then he suddenly fell silent, walked to the hallway where the telephone was, and started making a call somewhere. Since the sliding door was closed, I couldn't tell what he was talking about. Grandma seemed to be trembling slightly, as if something was wrong. After Grandpa finished his phone call and returned, he said, "Stay overnight today." "No, I can't let you go home today." I desperately tried to think if I had done something terribly wrong, but I couldn't come up with anything. After all, I didn't go to see that woman on my own. She appeared there by herself. Then, Grandpa left saying, "I'll go pick up Mims. "'Kay, please take care of Grandma." He drove away, in a pickup truck, heading somewhere. When I hesitantly asked my grandma about it, she replied in a trembling voice, "It seems you've been bewitched by the Hasshakusama. Your grandpa will sort it out. There's no need for you to worry." Then, until my grandpa returned, she talked to me bit by bit about the situation. In this area, there's a troublesome entity called the Hasshakusama. It takes the form of a large woman, standing at about 8 feet tall, as its name suggests, and laughs in a strange, deep, male-like voice saying, "Bobo bobo." People perceive it differently. Some see it as a young woman in mourning clothes, others as an old woman in a kimono, or a middle-aged woman in work clothes. But what's consistent is that it's a woman, unusually tall, with something on her head, and with a creepy laugh. It's rumored to have once possessed a traveler, but no one knows for sure. It's bound to this district by a Jesu statue and can't leave. If you're bewitched by Hasshakusama, you're killed within a few days. The last incident related to Hasshakusama was about 15 years ago. I learned later that the Jesu statue keeps Hasshakusama bound here for reasons unknown, limiting its movements. The statue was placed at the border of the village, one of 4 such borders, in order to prevent Hasshakusama from moving. It seems like there was some kind of agreement with neighboring villages to keep it here, possibly prioritizing water rights, with incidents occurring only every few to several years. People back then might have thought this was a fair enough arrangement. Even after hearing all this, it didn't seem real to me. Of course, it wouldn't. Eventually, Grandpa returned with an old woman. "You're in a pickle. Take this for now," the old woman, Mrs. K, said, handing me a talisman. Then she went upstairs with Grandpa and started doing something. Grandma stayed with me the entire time, even accompanying me to the bathroom and not letting me close the door fully. That's when I started to feel that this was serious. After a while, I was led upstairs and put in a room. The windows were completely covered with newspaper, talismans were stuck over them, and salt was placed in each corner. There was also a wooden box-like thing, not exactly an altar, on top of which was a small Buddha statue. There were also 2 chamber pots. Prepared was I supposed to relieve myself in these? As the sun sets, remember, do not leave this room until tomorrow morning. Neither me nor Grandma will call you or speak to you. Stay here until 7 am tomorrow. You can leave then. We'll inform your parents, Grandpa said seriously. I had no choice but to nod in agreement. Mrs. also told me, follow what was just said carefully. Keep the talisman close to you. If something happens, pray in front of the Buddha. I was allowed to watch TV, but I couldn't focus on it, and it didn't distract me. I didn't feel like eating the rice balls and snacks Grandma had given me when I was locked in the room. I just huddled in my futon, shaking with fear. Despite my state, I must have fallen asleep. When I woke up, there was some late-night show on, and when I checked the time, it was past 1 a.m. I didn't have a cell phone at that time. As I was thinking about how I woke up at an unpleasant time, I heard a tapping sound on the window glass. It seemed like the sound of someone lightly tapping with their hand, rather than throwing pebbles. I couldn't tell whether it was the wind causing the sound or if someone was actually tapping, but I tried to convince myself it was just the wind. I tried to calm myself by taking a sip of tea, but I was still scared. I turned up the volume on the tea and forced myself to watch it. That's when I heard my grandpa's voice. "Hey, are you okay? You don't have to force yourself if you're scared." I involuntarily approached the door, but then I quickly remembered what Grandpa had said. Then I heard the voice again. "What's wrong? You can come over here if you want." It sounded extremely like Grandpa, but I felt that it wasn't his voice. I didn't know why, but I had that intuition, and as soon as I thought so, I got goosebumps all over. Then, I noticed that the mound of salt in the corner had discolored at the top, turning black. I quickly sat in front of the Buddhist statue and desperately began praying, clutching the talisman. "Please help me." At that moment, "Po po 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 po," I heard that voice again, and the window glass began to knock. Tun-tun, tun-tun. I knew that it wasn't very tall, but I couldn't help but imagine it reaching up from below and knocking on the glass. All I could do was pray to the statue. It felt like an incredibly long night, but eventually morning arrived. The tea, which had been left on, was now showing the morning news. The time displayed in the corner of the screen was definitely 7:13. The sound of knocking on the glass and that voice had stopped without me realizing. It seemed that I had either fallen asleep or passed out. The mound of salt had further discolored, turning black. Just to be sure, I checked my own clock, and it was around the same time. I timidly opened the door, and there were Grandma and Ms. with worried faces. Grandma was crying, saying, I'm glad. When I went downstairs, my dad was there too. Grandpa popped his head out from outside and urged me to get in the car quickly. When I went out into the garden, there was a box van that he had brought from somewhere, and there were a few men in the garden. The box van seated 9 people. I was placed in the middle of the middle row. Ms. sat in the passenger seat, and all the men in the garden got in the van. In total, 9 people were in the van, and I was surrounded on all sides. It's a tough situation. You might be worried, but keep your eyes closed and look down from now on. We can't see anything, but you might be able to. Don't open your eyes until I say so, the man in his 50s sitting next to me said. Then, with Grandpa's truck leading the way, followed by the van I was in, and my dad's car in the back, we started moving. The convoy moved at a rather slow speed, probably not even going 20 km. Before long, Hasshaku muttered, "This is the crucial moment," and began chanting something like a Buddhist mantra. Po 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 po. I heard that voice again. I was clutching the talisman I received from Hasshaku with my eyes closed and head down as I was told. But for some reason, I peeked outside a little bit. What I saw was a white one-piece dress. It seemed to be moving in accordance with the car. Was it following us with those long strides? I couldn't see its head because it was outside the window. However, it started to lower its head as if to peer into the car. Unconsciously, I let out a eek. "Don't look," the man next to me shouted sharply. In a panic, I squeezed my eyes shut and clutched the talisman even harder. Knock, knock, knock. The sound of something hitting the glass begins. The people in the car around me let out short sounds like ha or hem. It seems they can hear the sound, even if they can't see it or hear its voice. Hasshaku puts more force into his prayer. Finally, when the voice and sound appear to stop, Hasshaku announces, "We've managed to slip away." The men surrounding me, who had been silent until then, let out sighs of relief, saying, "That's good." Eventually, the car stops in a wide area of the road, and I'm transferred to my dad's car. When my dad and grandpa bow their heads to the other men, Hasshaku approaches and says, "Show me the talisman." I look at the talisman that I'd been unconsciously gripping tight, and it's turned black all over. Hasshaku hands me a new talisman, saying, "I think you'll be fine now. But keep this with you just in case." After that, my dad and I return home. Grandpa and a neighbor deliver my bike a few days later. My dad reveals that he was aware of the 8th Hasshakusama. He tells me that one of his friends was captivated by it as a child and lost his life. He also mentions people who moved to different lands because they were captivated by it. The men who rode in the van are all somehow related to Grandpa's family, which means they are all related to me by blood, even if it's a very distant relationship. My grandpa, who led the way, and my dad, who followed behind, are obviously blood relatives too. They arranged it this way to try to trick Hasshakusama. Since my dad's brothers, my uncles, couldn't come over in one night, they called in people who were only loosely related but could gather quickly. Nevertheless, they couldn't arrange for 7 men to show up immediately, and since daytime seemed safer than night, I was locked in the room overnight. During the journey, it seems Grandpa or my dad were prepared to act as a decoy if worst came to worse. I was then told all of these details and warned never to go back there again. After I got back home, I talked with Grandpa on the phone. When I asked him about the voice that had called out to me that night, he was adamant that he hadn't done anything like that. When I thought about it, it sent chills down my spine. It said that the victims of Hasshakusama are often young people and children, especially those in a state of extreme anxiety. If they're spoken to by a familiar voice in such a situation, they might naturally let their guard down. A decade has passed since then, and I've begun to forget about that incident. But a terrifying epilogue occurred. One of the stone statues sealing the Hasshakusama has been destroyed by someone. And it's the one on the road that leads to your house, my grandma told me over the phone. Grandpa had passed away 2 years ago, and of course, I wasn't allowed to attend the funeral. I was told that Grandpa too had said not to let me come once he became bedridden. While I keep telling myself it's just superstition now, I can't help but feel worried. If I heard that po-po-po voice again. This is the end of this story. In this channel, I would like to share you Japanese history, culture, and other things related to Japan. Please subscribe to this channel. After hitting the subscribe button, please write, "I subscribed," in the comment box. Thanks for watching this video. See you next one.